Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, day 614 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian, and political reporter, Tal Schneider. Thank you both for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Today may or may not be a pivotal day in the Knesset, and we'll learn all about that in the second half of the program. But first, Manny will tell us about an unprecedented naval strike, IDF naval strike on Yemen. All this and more when we're back.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on two fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, Anachnu amcha b'nei britecha, we choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that the response to the hostage release negotiations is now with the Hamas terrorists. Indeed, there is some progress on this front, as Netanyahu announced yesterday. But in the meantime, fighting continues in Gaza, and all eyes are especially on the humanitarian aid effort, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where there have been reports in the past week and some of deaths almost every single day. Manny, what can you tell us about what's going on there, what we know about what's going on there at least?
So it's important to note that according to the foundation that's running the aid sites, they say that their operations have been going smoothly. There have been no such incidents, when they're open and at the aid site. And even the army as well is saying that these events of gunfire that, troops were firing at Palestinian suspects were at a distance from these aid sites and before they opened. And that's very similar to what we saw about a week ago. Sometimes it's a few hundred meters, sometimes a kilometer away, but it's nearly always before the aid sites even open. And again, in this case, yesterday, the army said that it did fire warning shots at Palestinians who approached troops in an area which is considered an active combat zone. The army has even called on Palestinians to only approach the aid sites between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., basically during daylight hours and not overnight. And this happened overnight. And the army Palestinian media reported that some 20 people were killed in this incident. The army says that according to its information, it didn't actually specify exactly, but it said its information shows that those casualty numbers are likely inflated and are inconsistent with the information that it has, but it is continuing to investigate. But it is not the first time this has happened. I don't think it will be the last time. But the IDF has been warning not to approach those areas outside of the times where the sites should be open.
Right. But of course, people are desperate and they want to have food. And so they're leaving in the middle of the night in order to queue up for the food distribution. And of course, we're hearing that even, within half an hour, food is being completely taken by the masses who are there awaiting the distribution. So it's a very tricky situation. And let's just add to that the IDF is not actually trained for crowd control. Of course, all the soldiers that I've spoken with are given a very well-drilled process in which to ward off potential terrorists, meaning there's a long checklist before reaching any kind of lethal fire. But the soldiers themselves don't know how to disperse crowds. So first of all, just tell us what you know about this checklist that every soldier is drilled in to not reach the state of lethal fire unless specifically needed.
Right, it's called the suspect arrest procedure. It's not a new thing for Gaza or anything. It's actually been far more common in the West Bank, but essentially is if someone's approaching you, a suspect's approaching you as a soldier, you first call on the suspect to stop, and then you fire shots in the air. And if they continue to advance, then you can fire towards the ground or towards the lower body of a suspect. And only after all of those steps can you carry out lethal fire to center mass, basically to kill a suspect who's approaching you. And it's very difficult in this sort of situation in Gaza now, where you have sometimes thousands of Palestinians approaching forces. They don't really know, the soldiers don't really know exactly what to do in those cases. They're not a police force. It's a war zone. They're fighting a war against Hamas. They don't carry tear gas and stun grenades with them. They just have their M16 rifle. So I'm not sure what else the army is supposed to be telling these soldiers to do or not to do, because this wasn't part of the sort of the mission that they're doing now, is to police thousands of people. The soldiers, they're in an area, they're fighting overnight, they're trying to battle Hamas, and then thousands of people approach them. The best thing that they can do is fire warning shots in the air, which is what the army says they've been doing. But on the other side, we're seeing reports of lots of casualties, dozens of casualties each time, and it's the army does need to investigate this to see if maybe troops are firing directly at people in these cases. But right now it's saying that the information that it has shows that these casualty numbers are inflated.
What can you tell us about what else is happening on the ground in Gaza, Manny?
So the army recently conducted an operation in the Houthi area. It's just sort of outside Khan Yunis. It's very close to Nir Oz, and on October 7, that's where most of the Hamas terrorists who attacked Nir Oz came from this community. The army says it completed an operation there, destroyed 1,200 terror infrastructures, which is likely buildings and tunnels and weapon caches and rocket launchers. Not the first time the army's operated in that area, but this was a much more extensive operation. And from some images I've seen, some satellite images and some other photos, it looks like the vast majority of this small town on the Israeli border has been raised, and it is part of the sort of the buffer zone on the border, this entire town, but a very significant amount of infrastructure the army removed in that area.
Manny, I know you have to run through a briefing, but let's talk about this unprecedented naval strike on Yemen yesterday. For the uninitiated, such as me, can you just paint the picture of what happened there? How many vessels were out there? Are we talking about above sea, or was there some kind of submarine action going on? What happened here?
So we're talking about the Navy's advanced Sarah 6 class corvettes. It's the sort of the most advanced missile boats in the Navy's arsenal currently. They were deployed to the Red Sea area. I think we can say that. Not the first time the Navy's been in that area since the beginning of the war, especially considering all the Houthi threats. They've been there to intercept drones and other projectiles fired at Israel. But they were essentially, these corvettes were deployed, I would say, closer to Yemen. And 2 long-range guided missiles were fired from these missile boats at the port of Hodeida, the port on the sort of the western coast of Yemen. It's controlled by the Houthis, and these 2 missiles destroyed infrastructure at the port. But it's important to say that these missiles were fired. Sort of the Israeli missile boats were hundreds of kilometers away from the port. They weren't close to the port and then shooting at it. They were very, very far away, and these missiles have, of course, a very long range when they're fired from the Navy ships. And this is the first time that the Navy has actually carried out a strike in Yemen. The previous 10 strikes in Yemen were all carried out by the Israeli Air Force with fighter jets, which make a lot of noise and have to get quite close. And then in the sort of the benefit of using the Navy here is the Navy officials say that is more discreet, because they're in the area already, and it's much sort of more quiet. It doesn't make as much noise, and they're also more available. So, since the Navy's already in the Red Sea doing all sorts of other patrol missions, they can be moved quickly to go and launch a strike if need be. Sort of, they're more available than having to fuel up 20 jets and have them fly with refuelers and reconnaissance and everything. So there is a benefit there, and I don't think it'll be the last time that the Navy carries out a strike like this on Yemen. But it was missile boats and not submarines, not this time at least.
How many missiles can such a boat carry? I would imagine that this would be the one downside of using these boats, because in order to rearm, they'll have to, go to shore or have some kind of, I don't know, shipping out to them? That seems to me the one downside here. Would you agree?
I would agree. It would take about, I think, 3, maybe 4 days for them to get back to Israel, depending on how far out they are. And if they need to, I mean, they could reach the Eilat port, which is one, but if they need to go reach their home base in Haifa, then they have to go through the Suez Canal via Egypt and via the Mediterranean. It's a very long trip. But I mean, I've been on these ships before, and I've seen that they have enough stock to launch any of these sort of operations. But yeah, eventually they do need to come back, and generally these missile boats spend sometimes 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks at sea.
And of course, just a few hours after the strike, we saw another missile from Yemen. So obviously this too did not deter the Houthis, right, Manny?
Correct. So this, again, another missile, I think the 48th, if my count is correct, from Yemen since Israel restarted its fighting in Gaza. This one was a bit more of a spectacle if people were watching or saw footage. The missile, when the first interceptor hit it, actually caused it to break up in the air, and lots of fragments scattered in the air, and then the Air Force had to launch at least 7 interceptor missiles to shoot down the fragments, because in the past, partially intercepted missile, the warhead has actually landed and caused harm. So they did not want to take any chances this time, and they intercepted all the big fragments that were also falling to the ground.
Boring, right, Manny? All right, Manny, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll go to a short break. Thank you.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our political reporter, Tal Schneider. So we heard yesterday that 5 nations are sanctioning 2 standing ministers in the Israeli government, and I'm talking about Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. And the nations that are sanctioning them are as follows: the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway. So they said yesterday that they would freeze assets and bar the entry of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich for having incited extremist violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. So that was interesting to me that they're specifying in the West Bank. So I'm going to read out a quote from the statement. Quote, settler violence is incited by extremist rhetoric, which calls for Palestinians to be driven from their homes, encourages violence and human rights abuses, and fundamentally rejects the 2-state solution. Okay, so the 5 countries followed up, and they stressed their support for Israel's security, saying, we will strive to achieve an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the immediate release of the remaining hostages by Hamas, which can have no future role in the governance of Gaza, a surge in aid, and a path to a 2-state solution. So, Tal, of course, the idea of the 2-state solution is on the horizon with this conference being held next week in New York with France and Saudi Arabia pushing for a 2-state solution. But I just don't really understand why this is one of the sticking points right now in these 5 nations as well. Is it just this new diplomatic trend to harken back to the two-state solution, which so clearly is dead in the water in Israel?
Right. So actually, at least some of those countries, I think Canada and Great Britain issued a warning about 3 weeks ago saying we are looking for more measures to bring to the Israeli government attention that we are not satisfied with whatever is going on out there. The issue of settler violence and I would say lack of enforcement in those areas has been on the table for at least 3 years, even before the war. We've seen an uptick in the numbers of events, and many countries have claimed that this is, it cannot go on like that. And when they talk about the rhetoric, I mean, some of the things that Smotrich said, for example, about Hawara, if you remember his comment, they came before the war. And as ministers, they have a lot of power and influence over the people who supports them. And those countries believe that with those inciting words or lack of enforcement, if we're talking about Ben Gvir, you bring on, you like signals to the people in the settlers in those areas that they can do whatever they want. So I think that's the background. You also, you may see it in a wider lens. You look at France doing this proactive conference, trying to bring in Saudis and others to talk about the two-state solutions. And then you see Great Britain taking this measure of sanctions, and the third big country in the European Union, Germany, just sitting aside and not taking a stand on those two issues. That's because of the special relationship between Germany and Israel. So 3 different approaches from Europe. We also know that there is on the table a European Union action against the association agreement with Israel. That's what we call a tsunami, of a diplomatic tsunami against the country. You see it right now with your eyes. It also gives a signal to many businesses around the world, in Canada, in Australia, in the European Union. It says to them, if you do not want to do business with Israel, we're doing sanctions. So that's, a dire situation for the Israelis, of course.
I think many Israelis would condemn Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and their rhetoric just as much, if not more, than the Europeans who are sanctioning him. But what was interesting to me to see, Tal, was the strange support that these two got from opposition members, such as Benny Gantz. What did Gantz say?
Well, Benny Gantz, who is the chairman of the Machaneh Mamlachti, it's the National Unity Party, he says that you should not sanction a person who was, democratically elected in Israel, and he doesn't like this approach. I mean, I would say his comments were mostly political towards his own base in the country. He's looking to gather more votes inside Israel, and it's not, he's not a foreign affairs minister, or he doesn't have influence on foreign affairs in any way. So this is mostly towards the base type of comment. That's interesting to me, Amanda, is that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, did not say anything on that up until now when we recorded. One more thing I wanted to say, which is important to our listeners to understand, is that Bezalel Smotrich is the finance minister of this country. And in retaliation to the announcement yesterday, he announced that he will block banking, banks work, like regular business of banks, with the Palestinian banks. He can do that through the finance ministry mechanism where you can block, it's called the correspondent action. It's based on 1994 sort of Oslo Accords, the pack of Oslo Accords. One of the things was that the Palestinians authority in the West Bank, they don't have a really independent bank systems because they cannot work with worldwide banks, and they count on the Israeli bank system to back them up. He said he will shut this down. If he will go through with that, that's a total collapse of the entire West Bank economy. It's a very grave reaction. I don't know if Netanyahu will move along with that, but that's on the table.
Right. As you said, Netanyahu is dealing with so much. And I said earlier in the program that there are indications that the hostage talks are moving to a higher level right now. So he's obviously dealing with that in addition to
Iran, Yemen, hostage talks, the war, draft bill, the dissolvement of the Knesset, his criminal trial, which he just stepped out of because he said he doesn't feel well. I mean, he's in a testimony today. And the wedding of his son next Monday.
Right. I'm not sure how much hands-on involvement he has with the wedding. I think he just needs to show up probably. But Tal, this is something I've wondered for a long time, and this is a bit in the realm of speculation. The Palestinian Authority has no central bank, and all of these European efforts to cause this two-state solution, just logically, in order to have a state, you need the infrastructure. And so I just wonder why a nation such as Switzerland, for example, who's very well known for banking, doesn't try and drill in and get this effort off the ground, this idea of a centralized Palestinian bank. Perhaps we can talk about this in a future program. But as you said as well, today in the Knesset, right now, we don't exactly know which direction things are going to be going, but it's quite possible, I don't know if probable, you'll tell me, that there's going to be a bill for the dissolvement, the dispersal of the Knesset. As we are recording, the opposition is still sitting together and deciding what their strategy is. So, Tal, what's your feeling here? What do you think is going to happen today?
Yeah, actually, when you were recording Manny just a couple of minutes ago, they made a decision and said, we are going through with the dissolvement of the Knesset today. It means that the opposition group of 52 members of the Knesset will vote to dissolve the Knesset. The thing is, of course, they cannot, the law cannot pass if you don't get the assistance or the joining of groups from the coalition. Now, the United Torah Judaism, the UTJ as we call them, said that they will join the opposition in dissolvement of the Knesset. But guess what, Amanda? It's not enough. It's up to 59. And in order to move forward, you need a majority, which is 61. Unless some people from the coalition do not show up. But, basically you need more people. You need Shas, the sporadic ultra-Orthodox, to join in. They're still debating what to do. Netanyahu and Shas chairman Derry are really trying very, very, very hard to block that. Even if it will pass today, which will happen probably very late at night in Israel's time. So we don't know, when we finish recording that, we don't know what the outcome is. But even if it passes, it doesn't mean that we are going to election tomorrow. The reason is this is a bill. It needs to pass 4 stages. This is going to be just the preliminary stage. The first stage, it's not enough. It can be blocked afterwards. But it means that the coalition, the so-called, Netanyahu had this really strong group of parties around him. It means that this group is not functioning anymore as a group, as a one group. The reason they're not functioning is the draft bill. As we speak right now, a member of the military of the IDF sits in what we call the Human Resource Subcommittee. It's a subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs Security Committee. And he says, and, it's not the first time, but it's a process. He says that next month they're going to issue 54,000 draft notices to Yeshiva Bucher, to Lomdei Torah, to the people who study Torah, or some of them do not study, but they they remain they remain close to the Haredi, to the ultra orthodox groups. They're just going by the book, by the citizens book. Everyone who has an citizen ID is going to get the draft notice to come and be recruited. And 54,000, this is between the ages of 17 up to 26 or something. People who were called before and never showed up. Now they're going to use their sanctions to make them come. I mean, sanctions can be you cannot get out of the country, you cannot, you can have your driver license barred, and you may not have other advantages or, things that are coming like childcare subsidies and so on. So once those notices are out, I mean, the ultra-Orthodox MKs, they've been saying it for a long time. We do not agree to that. And we will not sit in a government that allows those notices to be sent to our kids. as if there are only people that have kids. I mean, it's a draft in Israel. Everybody have kids that are being served with that. So they're very angry on that, and they're angry at Netanyahu that he's unable to solve the matter. And he's trying very hard with Derry to solve the matter, but they have not been able to solve it for like over 30 years. I find it perplexing to think that they would be able to solve it within the next couple of hours. As I said, even if they solve it or even if they don't solve it, it doesn't mean that the Knesset is going to election next week. It may take a time.
Okay, so essentially we're on the brink of a first reading of a bill to dissolve the Knesset. Even if this passes, it's quite possible it won't pass the two additional readings that we need in order to pass this bill. It's a 3-reading type bill?
It's a 4, no.
It's a private bill, so it needs 4 readings. Okay.
Today it's like the preliminary vote. They don't even call it the first vote. It's like the prior one. So the Likud members of the Knesset, some of them, they want to block that bill in order to remain in power. But some people from their voters and also some kind of junior members of the Knesset are not agreeing to that because they think the ultra-Orthodox should be recruited. And by the way, Amanda, it's a problem for Netanyahu to go to an election on that topic because the public, the general public doesn't like when you exempt people. It's a very, very unpopular proceeding. So people want to see people except the ultra-Orthodox themselves. Most of the public, like 80%, they want to see everybody in because they're sending their own kids. And the military, the IDF representative, they sit in the committees in the Knesset and they say, we need more manpower. We don't have enough people. We need more people, and we cannot do more reserve duty. We cannot have more. So it's a real problem, and people are not willing to accept this, full exemption. So Netanyahu yesterday, by the way, he issued a video, and he said, "I promise you, we're going to recruit 10,000 people from the Haredi society within 2 years." However, he did not say when does 2 years begin.
It is a bit of a cliffhanger day, and so we're going to end the episode with this to be continued ... Tal, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us a line to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.